Welcome to episode 90.5, the Coast to Coast AFL podcast, Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host. And in this one, we are talking about the Gold Coast Suns after their maiden voyage into the finals, their first ever final series. There's a lot of high hopes going into for the Suns in the 2026 season. Will they be able to recreate that and maybe even push further into a final series, or will they take another year to kind of continue to develop into the team that will push further into the final series? We will take a look at all of that. But firstly, how are you doing, Mr. Cyric?
Not too bad, Blazy. Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's a lot cooler. Well then, we had some trouble yesterday. It was too hot for recording. We tried recording this episode earlier. My internet broke. So if you hear any janky conversation, that's probably because of that. But apart from that, it's not too bad. Not too bad. Dropped 10 degrees cooler today. Just in the off time, I've been volunteering at Fringe Festival, which has been a blast. Got to see a lot of shows whilst helping out. It's been great. Going back there for a few times this week as well. So, yeah, no, it's been good.
It's very good, very good. For me, not too bad. On my weekend, which is very nice. The weather has gone up since yesterday. So instead of having like 22 degrees, it's like 30 today. So it's actually really nice out there. The sun's actually really, really nice to
Yeah,
be in.
same
Um,
temperature. Yeah.
yeah, it's wild. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the Suns. This is a team that I had a little bit of high hopes going into the 2025 season. But I know not everyone kind of saw the same things that I was kind of looking at. So Eric being one of them. To be fair, I didn't expect them to make finals. I thought maybe top 10 at minimum, maybe probably was where they were going to be. The fact that they made finals and the fact that they won their first ever elimination final as well, it's also very good. So let's jump over and talk about all of that.
Yeah. So we're starting obviously with the year that was for the Gold Coast Suns, and as I said, a couple of easy-ish opponents. We thought the Demons might be a bit better, but they, not managed to convincingly beat them. But the biggest standout in those early games was the big game against the Crows, 91-90. We all know there was sort of some controversial incident with one. I was about to say Josh Rochelle. It was Isaac
It was
Rankin with
Rankin.
the non-mark.
Yep.
So, as I said, maybe they should have won, maybe they shouldn't have, but there is no doubt that both teams went out of that game with a newfound respect. I think that's when we start believing both of them as finals contenders, and it will continue this way. Few sour losses, the random loss against the Tiger, the big loss against the Lions. But later in the season, they will turn that around by beating them, whilst also notching up some nice wins against the Bulldogs, Hawks, and the Magpies. That was a very weird game where they were held to 11 behinds at half, while the Magpies were, and then they ended up coming back, but not quite enough. And obviously, loss against the Power put their finals hopes in, question marks, but they ended up beating the Bombers to secure themselves for their maiden finals, and they backed that up with a massive win. As you say, the miracle behind by Andrew Swallow.
David Swallow.
David Swallow.
You do that every time.
I think I said that last time. Like we got to this point in the last recording, and I said David. Anyway, so yeah, but unfortunately against the Big Brother Lions, yeah, the Lions were just too good. They were on an absolute tear. But it was a bit concerning to see how easily the Lions sort of dealt with them. But otherwise, a very fantastic season and a lot more consistency than we're ever used to for the Suns.
Yes. A fair few big wins. Still a fair few big losses against the bigger teams. Like against Geelong, for an example. Against the Crows the second time. Obviously, the loss against the Lions in the semi-final. The loss against the Giants as well. That one. They're normally neck and neck in terms of where they're both at. But a big loss against the Giants. So like, there's still notable teams that they really still struggle against, and definitely areas where they can majorly improve. But they still had some fantastic wins, and it was good to see them finally break through to their finals. campaign for the very first time.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, it really is a credit to Dimmer Hardwick because, as I said, like I've still got some reservations, a tiny bit of maybe not so much him as a coach, but his coaching philosophies or a few things here and there. But yeah, he's absolutely gotten the most out of the list, and I think it's sort of reflected on the team stats,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
when you compare them to last year.
Yeah, I mean, look at all this green. It's a vastly different contrast.
Yeah, because last year, I don't know if you remember, but I did have the slide. I think it was for reasons of pessimisms, where it just showed all the stat differentials that the Gold Coast Suns were behind in, near last in the league. They were sort of sharing stats, not too dissimilar from the big bottom four of last year, which was North, Richmond, West Coast, and the Gold Coast Suns. Well, not, I don't think the Suns were bottom four, but they had a lot of stats that were very similar to them. Um, so we'll start off with the good. And a much improved area, still, on paper, slight bits of concern, but overall, they were pretty solid offensively. They were 13.4 goals per game, which is fifth in the league. Inside 50s was very healthy, 56.3, which is tied third in the league. A lot of time in forward half, 53.2%, which is third in the lead. Their chain to score, how likely a possession chain is to lead to a score, 22.5, third in the league. Goal assist 9.3, sixth in the league. Had a lot of goal shooters for a pretty, one man band lineup, let's face it. So, as I said, fairly healthy spread of scoring, despite on paper, probably just an okay forward line. You got the two main targets, which is Ben Long and Ben King. Ben King especially getting the most attention. And, just enough of their other forwards chipped in, whether it was Bailey Humphries kicking a few more goals, or the little but slightly solid contributions of Ethan Reed and Jed Walters.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. And like we'll talk about this a bit later on, but the fact that them bringing in a young tall in Ugal Hagen, even though he hasn't exactly been on the park in the past couple of years, will definitely be a big factor as to how they kind of restructure their tall forward line.
Yeah, and I think it'll sort of help them because, again, this is sort of the stats where, like it's still alright, but probably where that more lethal roaming key forward might help because their marks inside 50, great, 12.2 in the league, fifth, 12.2 marks per game, which is fifth in the league. But their mark inside 50 rate is only 21.7, 12th in the league. Again, Ben King was really and Ben Long were the only real solid marking targets. They were good at retaining the ball inside 50, 48.6%, which is tied fifth in the league, but that didn't translate to goals per inside 50. Only 23.7 inside 50% of inside 50s resulted in a goal, which is ninth in the league. Score shots per inside 50, 44.7, which is ninth in the league. So, in terms of conventional attack, they probably could have just done a tiny bit better. However, one of their biggest boons is their stoppage work, which is absolutely phenomenal and led to a lot of score. Their midfield were able to provide a lot more scoring this year. They got 38.9 points per game from stoppage, which is third in the league. Their defensive one-on-one win rate, 28.9, which is sixth in the league. Again, pretty solid. Offensive one-on-ones, 11.2, which is tied seventh in the league. So went to them a fair bit. And their inside 50 ground ball gets 15.7, which is fifth in the league. So overall, yeah, you look on paper, you're like, oh, it's not as threatening as it could be. But, as I said, they were able to get some solid output out of it. So, yeah, it's very nice overall. Despite, I don't think many people thinking that it's going to be their best line for the year.
No, a lot of people definitely wouldn't think that because you look at their midfield and they've got some insane talent in that midfield, and you look at their backline. Their backline has been very, very consistent. We will talk about that when we talk about the defensive stats. But yeah, their forward line was actually quite potent, despite how kind of makeshift it felt.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, there's no doubt that's just how well a year converting that Ben King had, and obviously cameoed pretty well, I would say, by Ben Long. Probably wasn't his best year in terms of just pure output, but are still very handy in the team. But yeah, as I said, it's just that getting those other players, like, as I said, developing at least one toll for next year, I think will be the big aim, and just working out. Sorry, when I say one other toll, I meant aside from Hugelhagen, who they've obviously brought in to fast track that. So, as I said, and obviously the players when the ball hits the ground, I forgot who I was talking about now.
Like
I was mentioning before.
your Humphreys and your
Humphreys,
Reeves, yeah.
and your even Took Miller if he spends more time forward, like we saw last year. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving on to defense now, where they again with their back line, you sort of expected them to be fairly well, and they were. Goals against 11.1, fourth in the league. Opposition chain to score 19.2%, which is fifth in the league. Opposition shots were limited to 23.4 shots per game, which is tied fourth in the league. Their opposition inside 50 retention rate was 45.7, which is sixth in the league. And their defensive one-on-one loss rate, 24.4, which is fifth in the league. And they were forced into defensive one-on-one contests 12.1 times per game, which is fourth in the league. Goals per inside 50 was also 22.5, which is fifth in the league. So overall, this is a very hard defense to score against. They're pretty well balanced. They've got a good defensive toll and small defenders. And, as I said, they just, make things difficult. But I will also say the midfield unit, as good as they are offensively, they seem to, let a bit of movement come the other way. They're not the most arm-strong team in the league. They won't hog possession. So their defense was tested out a lot of time, and most of the time they stood up strong.
Yeah, and like we already know that Collins is probably one of the best interceptors in the league. How his work rate is incredible. They brought in obviously Daniel Rioli and John Noble to do a lot of work off of half back and rebounds, which has been fantastic. They've got Mike Andrew down there, and he has been super solid for them. He's also been able to show a bit of flexibility and play out forward as well. There's just been a really good assortment of players going down there, both young and some with more veteran experience. That have just been really, really solid. Like Brody Hewland as well has been fantastic.
Yeah, as I said, we'll talk about it a bit later, but I suppose it should also not be understated. Charlie Ballard starts the year, unfortunately does his knee, I think it was.
It was an ACL.
Might have been ACL. Yeah, so yeah, he was out for the year. Obviously, the one that went to the Bulldogs, Connor Butterick, sort of didn't play much. He was already ruled out by that time at the season. So two very, very solid defenders. Obviously, they traded one off. They've got a few in the works. But, as I said, I also think that the rise of play like Joel Jeffries sort of helped them out a lot in shaping that defense. And Mac Andrews is sort of that offensive minded mid defender. I don't rate him as much one-on-one, but he is fantastic in terms of the structure that they like to have where, he sort of forces your opponents to make less easy entries because he's always roaming around trying to intercept, which forces it to the one-on-one contests or, pack where they do their best work.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
that's sort of, shown by the fact that there were 35.2 scores per game, which is first in the league. The opposition mark inside 50 rate, 9.4, which is third in the league. Oh, sorry, opposition marks inside 50 was a flat 9.4 third in the league. The opposition mark inside 50 rate was 19%, which was also third in the league. In terms of scoring spread, as much as I said that they were scoring from stoppages, they were also great at preventing score from centre bounce. 8.2, which was first in the league. Opposition defensive half to score was limited 11.6, which is fifth in the league. But opponent D50 to score, 9.7, 13th in the league. So what I really think that says is that while the Gold Coast is so good at stoppages, that, prevents like bowl ups from, the defensive halves and the wings from going to score, back up movement, they'll still allow opposition movement enough time and space to take it to their end. and, score at a fairly reasonable rate. So yeah, as I said, overall though, as I said, pretty fantastic. You know, um, slight like Gold Coast Suns. I don't really think had too many injuries last year, but the defense was probably the most banged up line, and they fared pretty well.
Yeah, it's not really much more you can really kind of add to that. It's the fact that like their list was fairly healthy for majority of the year. The only major kind of injuries that they had was Took Miller going out, apart from obviously Ballard and Buderick not being available for the defensive line. But like Miller being kind of the main one out of their entire core that just didn't that played here and there just due to he had a wrist injury at one point. I think he had a leg injury at one point, so he was a little banged up. But the fact that pretty much across the board it was such a consistent, healthy core and a healthy list that it made so much of a difference in terms of their work rate on field.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about consistency in that core, and I think it's really reflected in their movement stats. It's not quite a midfield stat thing, but as I said, it is dominated from the works of their main two men in the center. And I just want to say that Noah Anderson, Matt Rouse, both spent over 80, or Matt Rouse spent 81% of his time at center bounces, and Noah Anderson spent 86, which was tied with Ruckman Jared-Witz. So their main ruck, who, as you know about the Gold Coast, they don't really have too many backup rucks. So he spent as much time there. So they were able to spend a lot of time in the middle, and it made a difference. Still not a high disposal team, as I mentioned earlier, 352 disposal per game, which is 11th. Disposal differential was just a solid one game, which is 11th in the league. But they were able to get a lot more meterage than former years. Before, they would get absolutely smashed in that regard. But they actually gained 258.2 meters per game, which is 4th in the league over their opponents. And their meters per disposal was 17.7, which is 1st in the league. Meters per kick, 29.5, which is 1st in the league. And this makes it like they didn't take as many kicks, so they chose just to dump down the line on occasion. They had 55.3% of their disposals be kicks, which is 17th in the league. But with all that meterage, it's very surprising to see that their kicking efficiency, 68.2, which is tied 1st in the league. So even though that they were making these long direct kicks, they weren't just booting it down the line. They were able to work it out to players' advantage most of the time. And that ended up resulting in an inside 50 differential of 6.8 plus, which is 2nd in the league. And in a year where we had Geelong and Bulldogs also getting like insanely high inside 50 differentials, I think Bulldogs was 1st with about 8, which is ridiculous. And Geelong and Brisbane not far behind. As I said, this is absolutely fantastic. And considering where they were last year, all these stats are a testament to how much this group has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you just kind of look at it on paper, and like just even on paper, that it just shows how elite this lineup is. Like you've got Matt Anderson, Witz, Miller. You had Flanders in there for a while, even though he went out onto the outer. Ainsworth was in there as well, also went out on the outer. We'll talk about those list changes in a moment. But they had just a really good core and then a mix of players who were very serviceable going in and out of those positions, and it just contributed to so much just better movement overall.
Yeah, and as I said, it was all from the center. Their clearance differential 3.3, which is 4th in the league. Center clearance differential 1.9, which is 3rd in the league. First possession differential 3, which is 6th in the league. And their first possession to clearance rate 76.8, 3rd in the league. So, as I said, they were built off an engine. Just to wrap it out, though, I think most people saw some of their outside work wasn't too great. Their movement without their movement that didn't come from stoppage, their back half chains sometimes were lacking a bit. And I think that was overall, maybe not lacking a bit, but definitely inconsistent. We saw times where it really dried up for them. And that overall got presented in their stats that they're still a bit behind in, such as their marking differential, which is a 4.6 loss, 12th in the league. ground ball get differential 1.2 loss, 13th in the league, and tackle differential, which is 3.9 loss, which is 13th in the league. So even though it's not the most well-rounded movement, it's still lacking a bit on the outside. There's still a lot to like about the Gold Coast Suns in their stats.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll jump over to our list changes now because it'll really highlight kind of some of the bits that they may have lost in regards to what we like about them, but that what they've gained as well kind of balances it out really, really well. So I'll jump straight out onto the outs, starting with free agency and trade. And as I had mentioned before, Ben Ainsworth has been sent over to Carlton, Braden Fiorini over to Essendon, Connor Buderick, as you had mentioned before, over to the Western Bulldogs. Sam Flanders, as I had mentioned, is gone over to St Kilda, and Malcolm Roses Jr. has gone over to Sydney. David Swallow, the Miracle Man, the last inaugural Sun in the league, as far as I can remember, has officially retired. And then 3D listings with Tom Berry, Lloyd Johnston, and kind of the big one being Alex Sexton.
Yeah, the big Sexton. Sol played back at the end, played forward for the start of his career. Never quite could find his way on the list, but I think this is sort of like one of the bigger things where they've sort of, again, been good at either delisting or trading out players that just sort of haven't quite found their way consistently onto their list. The harshest trade out being Sam Flanders, leading possession getter. I'm pretty sure I said this last time and still forgot to check it, but I'm pretty sure last 2024 he led possessions in the league. He had a massive year, but their output wasn't good. They sort of moved him on the outer. He played an awkward role, but their team played better, so he goes to St Kilda to just go back into the inside. Braden Fiorini, he was like one of the more up and down players in his entire Gold Coast career. Looked very good until he didn't.
Yep,
Ainsworth, solid forward, but never really providing much offensively. Buderick just didn't really get his body right. And Roses Jr. was just a small forward that was very inconsistent, so he finds a new home. Lloyd Johnston sort of a bit in that same boat. Fortunately, probably a bit less talented. Showed glimpses. He had that one fantastic game up in Darwin. And Tom Berry, just an outside player that just never really made much of an impact.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much depth that I think could have been handy in case of major injury or anything like that. But I think they've got enough successful talent coming through that they may be able to at least, it provided the injuries, if injuries ever happen, pray tell they don't, like they should have enough depth to be able to at least cover for like a minor period of time. But anything major could be a bigger issue.
Yeah, and it's worth saying that their average age has now, and this is including the ins that come in, that we'll get into a sec. The average age is 24.1, which is the 14th oldest, or, fairly young. That's what, fourth youngest team in the league. And they're their average games is 63.9, and they're 15th most experienced team in the league. So very young core, especially with all those players going. So it is worth saying that that is a huge amount of experience to lose. And it is, it does raise a few question marks, but I think most people think that their ins and their draft picks are more than make up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for their ins, they brought over Jamari Ugle-Hagan from the Western Bulldogs. Again, hasn't really played much footy over the past couple of years, but we know how much of an insane talent he is in his when he first started out in his career. So hopefully, new scenery, new change of pace over at the Suns will do him some good and get him back on the field. And they've grabbed Christian Petrarca out of Melbourne. They have taken him from the Demons. He wanted out. We all kind of knew he wanted out. So he's gonna be put into a midfield that already has a ton of insane talent, and he's going to be able to just hopefully do what he does best.
Yeah, exactly. And it just allows them to have more rotation, as I said. So Christian Petrarca, he'll probably take the bulk of the centre bounces. He'll probably be somewhere floating to 60 to 70%. And then it just sort of allows Took Miller to rotate with him. And then they just sort of choose who to have as a bit more of an outside player who they float in there. So, provides some amazing flexibility to a strong but fairly inflexible with their rotation midfield unit of 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on their draft side of things, they picked up Zeke Euland at pick 2 via Academy. This is Bodie Euland's brother. Dylan Patterson at pick 5, also from Academy. Jai Murray and Bo Adensall, also from Academy, from their Gold Coast Academy at pick 17 and pick 18. Avery Thompson at pick 28 and Kobe Colson at pick 46.
Yeah, just a array of picks. Obviously the biggest thing is the 4 Academy picks. So they've really dipped into some at least talented players. You never really know until they make the field for a few years, but yeah, as I said, they have no concern about the depth coming in. They've got all fields, all parts of their field represented by young talent. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to jump over to the important players now, and I've got the first start with Ben Long. Everyone kind of knows, he's a small forward that plays tall. He's about 186 centimeters, so it's definitely very much highlighted that he's a small player. He'll flourish more under a proper tall forward structure because again, it's mostly just Ben King that does a lot of that heavy lifting, and he's able to focus a little bit more on his pressure and his tackling prowess. He's got some fairly decent numbers, but kind of upping those a little bit, especially at ground level, will go a long way.
Yeah, exactly. It's more just, being able to sort of not share, but like more evenly distribute his involvement in games, because there were times where he was just felt like he was forced into leading patterns. And when he, was covered defensively, he sort of fell out of games. And being, that small pressure tackling, I mean, he used to be a defender, so he's pretty good at ground level, putting that pressure on. So as I said, with that improvement of balance in their forward line, Ben Long might actually be able to be that more even player. As I said, a lot of teams are putting in again, small forward that plays tall, but like that tall player that can put on a bit of pressure, because it is important. As I said, it's one of my most gone to jokes. It's either the smallest tall defender or either the smallest tall forward or the tallest small forward in the competition, depending on your glass half full, glass half empty approach to life.
That's a good way to look at it. Next on my list is Bodie Euland. Very good ball mover, sitting in defense. Wants to continue to contribute to his 2024 and 2025 forms and improve upon his clearance work out of defense, because it's probably one of the only areas where he's like severely lacking compared to everyone else sitting in defense. And just a little bit more on his intercept marks. His intercept work is fantastic, but just being able to take some more of those successful marks will go a long way as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because as I said, they've sort of got their defense very set. Everyone's got that defined role, but Bodie Euland is one of those players where he's so good at like one-on-one defending. He keeps the smalls accountable and, sort of prevents them going off the chain. But at the same time, like, as I said, it is still important that he gets at least good link up with John Noble and Daniel Rioli, because, as I said, they want to get their output as high as they can, because there's some fantastic rebound prowess, sort of willpower. Sort of shared duties with him, I think. So, it's sort of weird. So maybe he actually just stays pure defensive and willpower becomes more of that sort of player. But either way, I think Bodie Euland is just so important and is a pretty fantastic user of the ball as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty, you trust the ball in his hands. So.
Yeah, agreed. And then I had to put him on the list. It's Matt Rowell. Like, well, I would not have been a good list without me not mentioning him. Let's be honest. Well, it'd be 2025 Brownlow medalist. Kind of hard not to say much else. He'll be looking to back that up after a very, very successful season. He's elite in most metrics in regards to his role, so there's not really anything he needs to vastly improve on. But it's just be like, things like clean hands, getting ball, like when you're getting ball off ground or by handballs and stuff like that. Just the more minute kind of things.
Yeah, I think it's also too like Christian Petrarca. As I said, he's not the exact same profile, because Matt Rowell, he's definitely more in and under. Christian Petrarca is more of that forward link up player, but because both of them are so insanely talented, their other areas are like so far nearer. It's not funny. But I do think we can see the return of sometimes a bit more defensive Matt Rowell. sort of the role he played in 2024, where he could really shut down players, lower his numbers, but, still make a big impact. And, as I said, he was forced to go back to that ball winning status. But I think Dimmer will be a bit more tactical on what Rao does. So I'm glad he won the Brownlow, because I think that he may be asked to have some more subdued role. But honestly, he's still going to have some fantastic numbers come the end of the year. He will love having a big body to help him, as well as applying that tackling. It's going to be. I feel sorry for the defender that has to decide between either running to Matt Rowell or Christian Petrarca at the contest.
Oh, that's gonna be a nightmare midfield to go up against, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. Noah Anderson, as I said, is fantastic, but he's sort of that one that they want to sort of handball to a bit more. Still wins enough of his own disposal. Is absolutely fantastic, but as I said, it is just insane how we're sort of talking about a possible could have been Brownlow medalist a bit under, because both are fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
All right, sorry, these are my players.
Yes.
Yeah. So, in mine, I was sort of looking for a bit younger, and I've sort of gone in the Will book. Starting with Will Graham, general forward / pinch mid. Easy to forget, but the solid pressure that this second-year player had. He was also going at over a goal of a game and having impact in stoppages before, unfortunately, he had a bit of an injury. He was the player that ran down a Bulldogs player in their win, prevented him from kicking a possible goal, but unfortunately did I can't remember what he did in the process, but it wasn't good. So he was one of their major injuries. He will look to be a mainstay this year in their forward line shift from the Suns, and he'll just sort of, go through the lineup. I think he's sort of the player that when you say, maybe they'll miss Ainsworth, or, I know he wasn't good at the role, but, the offensive things that Sam Flanders did. But I think they have a lot of faith in Will Graham, at least from what I saw last year.
Yeah, I think he's really come along as a well-developed player. He's still quite young as well, both Will Graham and Will Power. So they've got plenty of years under their belts to be able to continue to develop into really solid positions. And hopefully, some of the pressure that he's able to provide, like some of those run tackles that he did last year, will hopefully go I know I keep saying go a long way, but they really will, because they make such a huge difference in momentum shifts.
Yeah, and as I said, he was averaging, he had 2 games with 7 tackles. It was probably averaging, sorry, I don't know his stats. I would say that's 3 point something tackles per game. So yeah, no, as I said, he provides some good numbers there. The last one I want to talk about is the other Will, the Will Powell. Suns defend very tall, with Ballard, Andrews, and Collins being big presences. But the rest of their small defenders are very attacking oriented, sans Uland. Powell adds sort of a balance between these two, and his defensive efforts are fantastic. And I think he is the stepping stone to a fairly big drop off in defensive structures, because once you get past Powell, as I said, they start to get a bit thin on defense. Great great park players, as in their best list. But yeah, I think that's an area where they do drop off quite quickly. That, and obviously their key forwards, which they have a numerous amount, but some of them just not quite there yet.
Yeah. There's a lot of depth in their defense, and so it's a little bit hard to kind of break into that sort of structure. I think Will Powell definitely has a spot in there, and it'll just be able to find that right rotation and being able to structure up properly with Collins and Andrews specifically.
Yeah, because as I said, fingers crossed if Ballard, stays there for most of the year. As you said, the best 22, it's such a tight squeeze. But as I said, it's just that drop off afterwards. So if they stay healthy, it'll be absolutely fantastic. But as I said, with 25 on the bench, Will Power's going to be in their list more often than not.
I hope so. It'd be really good to see that, I think.
Yeah, well, I said he sort of proved himself last year. He had a under the radar but fantastic year.
All right, let's jump over now to our new faces, and we've already touched on both of them just before, but Cyrus will go into a little bit more detail, starting with Jamara Ugle-Hagan.
Yeah, oh, as I like to say, pretty much the free punt for the Gold Coast Suns because he didn't play a game in 2025. Undoubtedly a question mark, but as I said, the Suns developing forwards are iffy, and they paid next to nothing for Ugle-Hagan comparative to his obvious upside. So, as I said, at worst, he at least provides some competition and variety that might help players like Walzer and Reed sort of move along a little bit. At this point, I think Reed has a tiny bit more potential than Walters. I've never quite liked what I've seen from Walters, but I do hope he does come good. As I said, that's even without Ugle-Hagan growing, because I think most people expect him to at least get back a shade of his former talent. And probably, I think I wouldn't be surprised if he was like a 30 goal player, and that could possibly get to 40. But as I said, given time with the new team, it's pretty much just a free dice roll.
Yeah, like he's got plenty of years. Well, I think he was given a 2-year contract, so he should have plenty of time to like properly redevelop himself under Dimmer and
Yeah.
this new group of kids and stuff, and should be able to hopefully become the football player that he was kind of always destined to really be, because that's why he was obviously recruited initially by the Dogs.
Yeah, and as I said, it's also just about making sure that fits right to him. Because as I said, we won't touch too much about the personal issues, but as I said, if you believe strong enough in your culture, to where you can back yourself into bringing a player like Jamara, I think as I said, the upsides can be huge, and there's still a chance that it doesn't work out for him. Maybe he just doesn't have the heart, because obviously he sort of you know it was a bit up and down with that with the Bulldogs, but as I said, I do think like the upsides are worth it as long as you look after him, which is obviously the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously next on the list is one of the not best defenders, best midfielders, probably of the past 10 years, Christian Petrarca.
Yes, one of the most potent midfielders in terms of scoreboard impact. Petrarca just looks to increase the already improved mid-forward connection, as well as being a solid marking option in their transitional football. I think that can't go understated because they tend to run the ball through their mids. They tend to link up with hands. So having that strong marking presence to start a handball chain, that's also good with their hands. Absolutely fantastic. Might spend a bit more time forward than he did at Melbourne. Oops, sorry.
Very good.
But yeah, we'll provide a lot of protection if one of the big three core of Anderson, Rao, or Miller go down, which obviously we hope doesn't. But you know what I mean. It just adds to their flexibility.
Yeah, it gives them so many more options, especially as we've already kind of discussed. Like Miller could also rotate up forward if need be. He's got that talent to be able to do that because he's done that in the past. And then you bring Petrarca into more deeper midfield. Being able to have that option to be more flexible is a huge thing because that is one of the facets that they were lacking in terms of their midfield structure.
Yeah, exactly. So we've already been fairly positive, but we'll continue that train by going to our reasons for optimism. And, I sort of started with, half a sort of apology for my analysis in 2024 by saying that there's no underselling how insane their statistical growth was from that year to this year. They improved their midfield structure with some pretty tough changes. As I said, taking what's his name Flanders outside of that midfield was a really tough call. And as I said, a lot of fantasy owners would have absolutely hated it if they started with him. But as I said, it really changed the dynamic and made their list a lot more even. I really think that the first time that their list is good to great. And their list management, sorry, I should say, is good to great, at least for the last couple of years. And this is undoubtedly the best list in Gold Coast history.
Oh, 100%. Like there's no doubt in my mind that bringing in Dimmer and the people that he brought with him in terms of coaching staff, in terms of extra list management, all sorts of, like everything outside of the on-field stuff, like has been fantastic, and it's just completely reinvigorated this Gold Coast team. Like they've kept most of the players that had been brought in by Stuart Dew, and kept a really solid core that he created. But being able to like build the team around that core is one of Dimmer's specialties, clearly, and he's done some fantastic work in how this team has been structured. It's pretty much, yeah. There's so much to like about the Suns in 2026. Like as I just said, their recruiting's been fantastic. The kids that they've acquired via the draft over the past couple of years has been really solid. And now that they've tasted finals, the monkey is off their back about that pressure, and they don't really have to worry about too much anymore. Like obviously, getting a premiership itself, that would be the cream of the crop kind of thing, especially for these kids. But I think a prelim would be their next ideal goal, and just to be able to take that kind of next step. You don't have to take the huge leap because the premiership itself, the grand final itself, is a whole other pressure beast. Dimmer knows that very well. All the other teams that have experienced finals in the past few years know that very well. So just being able to at least take those smaller steps towards getting to the top is definitely probably the next goal for them.
Yeah, and it's so important because we're talking about it's like for so often it is like, are the Suns ever going to be good? And now they've sort of proved that, and now it's just we just ask how good are the Suns going to be. As I said, it's not a question of them needing to pass a threshold. It's up to them to prove to themselves like how far are we going to take this, and it just adds so much joy to a pretty lackluster fan base, it's fair to say, who have had just no success over the last 15 years or however long it's been. So, yeah, as I said, it's really good to see.
Well, as we've seen from the growth of in GWS, which will be in the episode after this, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. The more your team kind of sees finals or sees at least like much more continuous improvement, the bigger your fan base is going to get. Like that's why they became the Orange Tsunami, and why the fans, even though they do look kind of small, are quite prominent as of recent years. And I think the Gold Coast Suns will experience that same sort of wave as they continue to get better.
Yeah, as I said, it's just overall good. But now we're gonna like piss on the fires a bit more. We'll go for the reasons of pessimism, which we do have to state. And for me, I think it's just they've actually made their list younger, bringing in Petrarca in the offseason, as I mentioned before. And I do love that they've made some brave list goals. But the flip side of that is they are opening themselves to putting some really raw talent in after a few injuries. They have 15 players that have debuted but are under 50 games, so essentially between 1 and 50. And the only ones I'm really excited for are Uland, Graham, and Longbard. Again, ruling out any of those who have played 0 games. So, as I said, still some good talent, but, as I said, they've also got some players that I just go a bit, they're okay.
Yeah.
I think a lot of their talent is the academy picks of the last 2 years who just haven't been proven yet. So it's still unknowns in that regard.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same sort of lines. It's mostly the depth is my issue because most of the talent is already kind of on field, and we don't really know how well development is going on. Sort of the more the raw kids that they've only just picked up. And I also kind of throw Ugle-Hagan into that because again he hasn't exactly played football in a while, so there's no guarantees that he will be as good as he was. That may still take a while. Hopefully no injuries. But again, just because of the lack of depth they have in certain spots, it could be the big make or break.
Yeah, exactly. But as I said, who knows? We could be seeing a year where Ned Moyle and Oscar Adams have a breakout year, making myself look foolish like I did last year. So, as I said, it is really exciting to see if the Suns can continue their good form. I think we both agree that they have enough talent to mask their iffy depth that we just talked about. But I do think that their big names like King and Collins, they would probably sink their season if they were out. And I don't like to do my predicted range like saying, oh, if King went out, they could fall to 12th or 13th. I just don't like to do that. So I haven't, but it is probably important to note that, to make a cohesive plan to, bring this Gold Coast Suns and fast track their development, they have made a few players central. And the other side of that is, as I said, there are question marks if those players, and I think we can, well, maybe Collins is a bit interesting, but I definitely think King is like one of the most targeted forwards in the league. Like last year, it was probably Jeremy Cameron. This year, probably only Port Adelaide with Mitch Georgiadis relied on a tall forward as much.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty accurate. I would definitely put them in as a finals lock for this season, and I would very much, I want to hope it doesn't happen. But yeah, if they lose players like King, like Collins, if they lose Rowell or Anderson, they might be okay. But it would be really tough to mostly deal with a loss of the two kind of spearheads at each end of the ground.
Yeah. Also, I don't remember if I said it, but my predicted range is 3rd to 9th. I
Yeah,
think
you
they're
didn't
locked for
say it, but I was
finals.
going to go on along lines anyway.
Yeah. I do think that they would be surprised if they had the consistency for this young depth for a top 2 spot. But they could definitely break top 4. But I think it would take a tiny bit of luck for that upper range. But yeah, as I said, I do think that they've got a lot of upside. And I would imagine probably taking a finals to Metricon. Hopefully.
I would imagine that would be the case. I don't entirely know, purely because of the fact that I guess what the finals quote unquote agreement is for Queensland, because whenever
Oh yeah, they could play it at the Gabba, couldn't they?
because of the fact that yeah, like if you're gonna expect big crowds, you could play it at the biggest ground
Yeah,
venue, which is
Metricon's a baby stadium.
Geelong home finals get played at the MCG. But I think
Yeah.
but that's also because of the fact that the MCG is also considered one of Geelong's home grounds.
Yeah.
And which is why no finals really get played at Marvel either, for that fact, because everything will just go to the MCG. So I don't know if it's a similar situation for Queensland, or the Gold Coast would be okay with getting a game at on the Gold Coast because of the fact that they only have their stadium as their home ground. I'm not entirely sure what that kind of situation is. And the only other state that would have this situation is New South Wales, with the Suns and with the Giants and the Swans, because Perth only has the one stadium. Adelaide only has the one stadium, so they don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. I don't think they ever talked about ever moving games out of NG, but I think NG might be a bit bigger capacity by
I think they're very similar, so it doesn't matter too much from what I know.
Yeah, I think Metricon's 30,000. I thought NG was closer to 35, but I could be wrong. Anyway, the fact that we're talking about this just shows how how much more positivity we are talking about the Suns, where I was just like, yeah, I still in my gut feeling feel like they're going to finish closer to bottom 4, which ended up being wrong. And look, as I said, I'm on record, like I am absolutely fine being wrong on something like that. Like, yeah, I maybe tend to be harsh on teams that haven't improved statistically, or like have that proven history, but it's not like I like have great joy in that. Like I love to live in a world where, there's upset teams and all that sort of thing. I do make a lot of jokes at the Gold Coast expense as like a region where sports teams go to die, but it is genuinely good for the league and just for sports stories in general for the Gold Coast Suns to be competent.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like we want, especially for a sport like ours, I say like ours, like the AFL, we want it to be a game that is supported nationally, and with what the AFL heads are currently doing over in India, possibly internationally, because apparently it's become a bigger sport over there over recent years. Which makes a lot of sense because it's obviously Australia is a big AFL culture and then a big cricket culture. India's kind of become the same thing, so that'll be really interesting to see.
Just a lot of working relations too, as well. There's a lot of Indians that come over here, spend at least up to a year here, especially in our winters, and then follow this strange sport of ours. So as I said, I hope it is a bit more successful venture than some of the other AFL ventures in the past. So,
Oh yes, definitely.
But yes. So who knows? Maybe 2026 will be the Suns being the world champions.
Who knows? But that brings us to the end of the Gold Coast episode of the preseason analysis series. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just coming to hang out with us. Next up will be the Gold Coast Suns. We just did that. Will be the Giants, and then Hawthorn. Just a quick update, because the preseason is rapidly approaching. We're gonna try and start getting 3 episodes out per week, just to try and pump the rest of these out. We have most. Well, I want to say we have most of our information done. We still have a lot of work to do, but we want to get through it all. Just so we're able to be pretty much up to date, catch up on any news and things of that nature, as the preseason rolls around, and then going straight into the season itself. So we'll try and get as much out to you guys as we can. No promises, but we'll do our best. But until then, thank you all so much for coming out, and we'll see you all on Sunday for the Giants episode. So until then, take care.